Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, talking with my friend Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. Matthew, thank you for generously making the time once again. How are you?
Oh, great to be with you, and a joyous Easter octave for everyone.
Blessed Easter octave to you and your family and everyone at EWTN News as well. So, this, so the Iranian conflict, this is perhaps the thing that the world is talking about right now. From an overarching perspective, I invite you to share a proper Catholic way of viewing the situation.
Well, first, one can echo the aspirations of Pope Leo, the comments of Archbishop Timothy Broglio, who's the Archbishop for the Military Services, in expressing gratitude that at least some form of a ceasefire has taken place. Now, there are two big provisions to that. The first is that it's a fragile ceasefire. We can talk more about that in a second. But then the other is the reality that Lebanon has been sort of carved out of that ceasefire. So Israeli operations against Hezbollah in particular in Lebanon are ongoing. And we know that the humanitarian crisis that's resulting from that is immense. The Order of Malta in Lebanon on EWTN News Nightly was making the point that at least 1.3 million Lebanese have been displaced, and that obviously we can add that the Christian villages in Lebanon are under dire threat because Hezbollah sees possession of those villages as essential for their own campaign against Israel. So, yes, we have a ceasefire, but it is a fragile one. We'll see what happens in Pakistan with negotiations, where Vice President Vance is going. But at this point, we certainly can only keep praying that peace will actually prevail and that some kind of a resolution that can prevent more massive destruction can be achieved.
In the ongoing speculation and unfortunately tribalistic narrative spinning, one of the things we've seen come out in recent days is the claim that the United States government levied threats against Pope Leo and via the Apostolic Nuncio here in the U.S. I'm glad that EWTN News covered it, and I invite you to be a voice of sanity here.
Yeah, so what you're referring to is an article that was published in the Free Press that, in its reporting, claimed that the U.S. government summoned then Apostolic Nuncio Cardinal Christophe Pierre to the Pentagon. And that, according to their reporting again, delivered what has been referred to as a bitter lecture, insisting that the Holy See take the side of the United States in various global military conflicts. From two different directions, that has been not just disputed, but almost dismissed out of hand. The first was from the Department of War, Department of Defense, depending upon your preferences for usage. They said that the reporting itself was highly exaggerated, it was distorted, that there was, in fact, a meeting that took place between the Vatican officials, including Cardinal Pierre, which is correct because he was then the nuncio to the United States, and Pentagon officials. But they described those meetings as respectful, as reasonable, and stressed again that they have nothing but, they said, the highest regard and welcome for continued dialogue with the Holy See. At the same time, just today, the Apostolic Nunciature in the United States, which, of course, has a freshly appointed new nuncio, and that's Archbishop Gabriel Katcha, that they were able also to confirm the meeting, that the Cardinal discussed current affairs with U.S. officials. They said that those are standard practice, and that, as they put it, the Apostolic Nunciature is grateful for the opportunity to meet and dialogue with government officials. Now, two other things worth noting. The first is Brian Birch, who's the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See, posted on X and said that, according to him, he was told by Cardinal Pierre that the reports of the so-called bitter meeting were fabrications, that simply did not happen in that fashion, that there was a meeting, but the meeting was frank and cordial. And then the Department of Defense also posted on X, again disputing the claims, and also shared images between Cardinal Pierre and various government officials If you take a look at the post itself on X, it's very clear that let's just say there did not seem to have been a lot of screaming taking place. Smiles were abounding. Now, they're all diplomats, but I think we can safely say that I think some of these reports, you can call into question their accuracy.
Can you lend some wisdom to the tendency we have for conspiratorial fact spinning, especially with regard to the present-day political milieu?
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple things at work. The first is we live in this 24/7 news cycle. It's compounded by the use of social media and the importance of getting out there with stories. So, the idea of you don't always have to be first, but you always have to be right isn't always necessarily taken as a way of living in terms of many aspects of journalism. So that social media then will take a story and it will amplify it. And you've used an important word, Marcus, and that's tribal. That there is a tendency in a lot of circles to sort of extrapolate and to exploit what might be a sensational-looking report. And that's for clickbait, that's for hits, however you want to describe it. But we're also seeing two other things at work. The first is that there are genuine and understandable disagreements on the part of a lot of moral theologians as to whether or not this campaign meets the threshold of the just war principles that the church has enunciated over these many centuries, both in whether or not it was justified in going to war and then also in the conduct of war. So you have the technical terms, ius ad bellum and ius in bello. Mm-hmm. So I think that has created an atmosphere in which some are worried about where this could all lead, which then feeds into, fair or not, other narratives. And one of those narratives is that there are individuals who want to try to damage the relationship between the Holy See and the United States, and also to create wedges politically, even among Catholics, who might, to a large degree, come to common terms or consensus on whether or not this reaches the justification for war, but at the same time have very strong political disagreements that feed also into the polarization that we see in some corners. Ironically, that is something that Pope Leo is working so very hard to fix and to bring everyone together in the church, really into a united position for the church.
So to talk about this constant question of Christian unity, too, one of the criticisms levied against the Holy Father is that he's opining on especially these questions about the Iranian war, but he doesn't seem to care about Christians being massacred by Muslims in Africa. But it's clearly not the case. So let's start on this and continue in the other segment.
Yeah, well, I think the Holy Father has been very clear on all of those fronts. Mm-hmm. We know, for example, in his meeting with diplomats, that he expressed that grave concern about the persecution and suffering of Christians around the world. And it isn't an and or, it's an and that he is able to articulate that.
I am talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. He and I are talking about church news, current events in light of church teaching, and we were just finishing up talking about the issues pertaining to the Iranian conflict and how to think of that in proper Catholic terms and lenses. We are going to then proceed to talk about the Pope addressing tensions between Christianity and Islam in Africa, and why Pakistan's bishop doubts that the government will act on forced marriage of a minor. Now, all of these things, as we continue to discuss, Matthew and I encourage and exhort all of us to adopt a sense of what one would call the radical center, which is the path of virtue, that even amidst this 24-hour news cycle, to never allow ourselves to be given to outrage and to be students immersed in wisdom and prudence in the heart and mind of the church. Continuing on the other side, stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. Matthew, we had just begun touching on the fact that the Holy Father is going to start addressing the tensions between Christianity and Islam in Africa.
Yeah, that's right. To that point that we were just discussing before the break, I mean, he's embarking in just a few days on the largest journey of his pontificate so far. It's an 11-day trip from April 13th to the 23rd. He's going to be visiting 4 different countries: Algeria, Cameroon, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea. And it is, to my mind, especially significant that he's stopping in Algeria. First, its obvious presence in the Islamic world in North Africa as the largest of the Islamic countries, but also, obviously, the great legacy of St. Augustine, who, of course, the Order of St. Augustine takes its name from him, and he will visit, Pope Leo will, who, of course, famously is a member of the Order of St. Augustine, the historical and archaeological site of what's called Hippo Regius, which is part of the remains of the ancient city of Hippo, of which St. Augustine was magnificently a bishop. And then he'll be meeting with what is, I know, the very tiny Catholic population in that region. But notably, too, he will visit the Great Mosque of Algiers, which also happens to be one of the largest mosques in the world. And so I think we're seeing this a twofold action on the part of the Holy Father in Algeria, that celebrating what is the lost and tragic history of Christianity in Algeria, but then also dealing with the reality of present-day Algeria, and that is to be a significant player, certainly in North Africa, in trying to combat Islamists, radical jihadists, Boko Haram, and other groups. So I think that as a first stop will resonate very significantly across the Islamic world, this being Pope Leo's first foray into that part of the religious landscape of the globe.
What are we seeing coming out of attempts at dialogue with Islamists and Muslims in general in the region?
Yeah, well, I think he will be continue to pick up that theme in the other African countries he's visiting. And from that standpoint, I think he's building on 2 great legacies, and it's going to be very interesting to see how he approaches this. The first, obviously, was Pope Benedict XVI, who had a very clear outreach in terms of interreligious dialogue with Islam on the idea of reciprocity, of granting heightened religious freedoms to the Christian communities in their region. But also, I think he will be building on the legacy of Pope Francis, who, of course, made 5 trips, I think, to Africa, as well as very famous trips to Iraq and to Lebanon. And I think the Holy Father will be working from that side, too, on the idea of fraternity, which, of course, is one of the pillars of Pope Francis's efforts at interreligious dialogue. The idea of finding this common ground, looking at the dignity of the human person. It's obviously difficult to have theological discussions, but it is also important to keep those avenues of dialogue open. And I think one thing that Pope Leo brings to is, given his extensive experience in Africa, in traveling the world as a missionary, he is very much aware of the massive Muslim communities in places like Indonesia, in North Africa, and of course in the Middle and Near East. So he will bring, I think, the sensitivity of somebody who has been in the missions, who understands the challenges, but also the sense of urgency of evangelization, of proclaiming the gospel in territories where the faith is tiny. And I think we'll see if he evokes, too, the image and the legacy of Charles de Foucauld, who was one of the great saints recently canonized, who died in North Africa, living the faith amid the Tuaregs, amid this ocean of Islam.
Given the news that you and I have been following about the massive massacre of Christians across the entire African continent, are we going to see real problems with attempting a fraternal dialogue with Islam in general in the region?
Well, I think one thing that we have as this backdrop now is this extensive regional conflict involving Iran, and which, of course, has now spilled over into the moderate states of UAE. You know, we've got Dubai, we have Oman, who had been, on the Iranian assumption anyway, were going to be voices to try to prevent first the attack, but then also the continuation of the U.S. campaign. I think Iran's actions have shocked many of the moderate states who realize that Iran is not, in fact, a reliable partner, and certainly someone that you can trust. We're seeing how they're reacting to this. So that, I think, also opens up the door for an opportunity for some of these more moderate Islamic governments to find ways for expanding even further religious liberty. Now, whether that happens, I don't know. But I think the Holy Father, certainly in establishing and developing and nurturing the relationship with those moderate voices across the Islamic world, I think sees this as a potential opportunity for a real appeal to peace that the world cannot afford much longer. The scale of violence that we're seeing and have seen for many years, you can go all the way back to 1979 in the establishment of the Iranian jihadist regime, and the problems that it has created, and the violence and the death and destruction it has created. And we can lump into that as well Hamas, Hezbollah, and so many of the proxy organizations that are funded and helped by Iran. So I think Pope Leo may find himself at the catching a wave, so to speak, of a real sense of urgency about finding long-term solutions, and that has to involve Catholic Islamic Christian dialogue.
To further talk about the persecution of Christians, what do we know about what's going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo?
Well, it's ongoing problems, of course, of jihadists. We're seeing the same problems that we are elsewhere. Certainly now in sub-Saharan Africa, we're seeing it in Nigeria, we're seeing it elsewhere. One thing that I think, as we're talking about the Pope in Africa, he's going to be in a place like Cameroon that has a long history of the church. The Catholic University of Central Africa, for example, is a very significant thing. But he is also very much aware of many of the challenges that exist because of political and social tensions. That brings him also to Angola. He'll be visiting Luanda, and there it's the same situation. But in each of these places, and I think this is going to be a significant part of that, in each of these places, the Holy Father is going to be able to speak in so many of the dominant languages of those regions. So we're going to see him next week speaking in English, in French, in Portuguese, and in Spanish. And I think we haven't seen that quite like this, really, since Pope Benedict XVI, who was himself a polyglot, a remarkable linguist. And I think that is going to further, Pope Francis had a beautiful way of touching deeply the hearts of people with gestures. I think Pope Leo is going to be able to communicate his concerns to these different countries in Africa with his speeches, with his language, and of course that quiet serenity that he has, and that a way, the beautiful way that he has of really communicating, and his choice of words. I think we all want to pay close attention to his homilies.
Yeah. Matthew, thank you very much for your salient wisdom as always. I was going to ask you about Bishop Melchizedek Sikuli Paluku, but we ran out of time. Thank you very much. I've been talking
next week.
There's always next week. My guest is Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News, and we've been talking about church news and current events in light of church teaching. Pray for the Holy Father's very diplomatic work. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.